Of the 12.5 million Africans loaded onto 35,000 Atlantic ships by American and European slave traders, few left personal written accounts of their ordeal. Some of their life experiences were described as entries in the voluminous commercial papers of those involved in the slave system, and are remembered mainly by the way their lives were recorded by their captors and tormentors. As a result, their stories have remained largely hidden behind the statistics. Their monetary value, their gender and age distributions, their physical condition, their health and death, and their tragic numbers. Yet we know a great deal about those who suffered upon Atlantic slave vessels and their transfer from shore to ship, their incarceration, often for months at a time, in the floating prisons on the African coast, and their daily routine in the ships during what must have seemed an interminable crossing. For week after miserable week, African captives were effectively lost at sea. They were stranded, they knew not where, and were subject to a shipboard system of control designed to keep them subdued and alive until a ship made landfall in the Americas. These weeks at sea were defined by fetid holds tight-packed with people, high levels of nausea and sickness, and random and often cavalier acts of brutality, and in the case of 1 out of every 10 slave ships, outbursts of resistance and violence. Slave ships were a stew of human misery and terror. The most famous description of the Middle Passage is that of Olaudah Equiano. Doubts persist about his place of birth, but his account is perhaps the best reporting of life aboard a slave ship. Equiano wrote, "I was soon put down under the decks, and here I received such a salutation in my nostrils as I had never experienced in my life. So that, with the loathsomeness of the stench and crying together, I became so sick and low that I was not able to eat, nor had I the least desire to taste anything." Indeed, slave ships were so notorious for their stench of bodily fluids, excrement, and human waste that sailors often detected nearby vessels not from sight but from their odor, which the Atlantic winds carried for miles. Despite the odds, enslaved Africans regularly tried to free themselves from the slave ship and crew. Shipboard revolts were common, especially while the ships were anchored on the coast of Africa, though few succeeded. Over time, shipbuilders and captains designed and organized the sailing vessels to deal with possible African resistance. The captain and crew were constantly alert for signs of revolt. When a mutiny erupted, the crew used extreme violence to suppress African captives. Those who rebelled were savagely punished by the crew, and ringleaders were usually killed in front of the other Africans, then cast overboard to the sharks. Ironically, the loss of Africans to revolt, punishment, torture, or illness could be compensated by the Western European insurance companies invested in the Atlantic trade. African captives greatly outnumbered the slave ship crew. Therefore, slave traders devised severe methods to maintain control. Without the use of chains and manacles, guns, and torture, the handful of sailors would have faced far more challenges from their captives. Moreover, shipboard conditions created the environment for contagious sicknesses, notably the bloody flux, dysentery, which infected the captives, killing many and reducing others to a wretched state. Though the great majority of Africans survived the crossing, more than 1 million died during the Middle Passage. Many men, women, and children survivors stepped ashore weakened and often gravely ill. The Middle Passage did not complete the forced journey of African captives. From points of arrival in American port cities, captives were subsequently taken over land or water on lengthy passages that delivered survivors to the mines, fields, and houses of their New World enslavers. For many Africans who survived the Atlantic journey only to labor in harsh conditions in the Americas, perhaps it seemed that the Middle Passage never completely ended. However, the perseverance and survival of the majority of African people taken captive into slavery and trafficked in the Middle Passage is evidence of these people's cunning and spirit during times of seemingly endless cruelty and torture.